All right. Okay, so first I would like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Maggie Wallem Rowe is a national speaker, dramatist, and writer from Western North Carolina. Married for 45 years to her pastor husband, Mike, mother of 3 and grandmother to 6, Maggie's work includes decades in public relations, adult education, and ministry to women. Maggie is the author of the nonfiction work, This Life We Share, and the upcoming Life is Sweet, Y'all. And she is here to be our interlocutor with our featured author, naturalist, photographer, and award-winning author Cheryl Gray Bostrom lives with her veterinarian husband in rural Whatcom County. Her work has appeared in a variety of publications, including the American Scientific Affiliation's God and Nature magazine, for which she's a regular photo essayist. A member of the Red Bud Writers Guild, she has also authored 2 nonfiction books. She's here to present her first novel. Let me just click so I can see everybody. Sugar Birds, which just came out today. So everybody, please welcome Cheryl Gray Bostrom and Maggie Wallem Rowe.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And Claire, I have to say, I've never been called an interlocute. I can't even, I've seen it, I've read it, but nobody's ever called me how do you pronounce that, Cheryl? Interlocute, whatever. Thank you. I'm the conversation partner. That part I can say. And I just want to give a little disclaimer. Sometimes people wonder, obviously Claire is representing Village Books, and you might wonder, how did I get involved with this? Well, y'all, I love the book. I'm not Cheryl's publicist. We have actually never met in person. We just got to know each other this past year. So I don't work for her publisher. I don't work for the bookstore. I am on this call for the same reason you all have joined, is that I love great writing. And when I read this book, I wanted to tell everybody I knew that they had to pick it up. And this is the easiest way for me to reach as many as possible and tell you, you've got to read this book. So just a little disclaimer, if you wonder if I'm a hired gun, no. Cheryl and I have not been BFFs since kindergarten. We have yet to meet in person, but I love her book and I love talking about wonderful writing. So we're going to plunge right in. And we also, Cheryl, you can correct me on this, but I think during our hour together, probably in about 10 minutes, we'll do the first couple of drawings, right? You're going to be giving away, I think, 4 different books. Is that correct? Okay,
Yep,
so
we'll draw names. I have the names of everyone who registered, and they're in a hat, and I will draw them. So we'll do that.
Yeah, we are very high tech, very high tech. Yeah, so she'll put them in a hat. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. And as Cheryl has promised you, this hour would not be complete without some puns. She is a very punny person. She is the reason that Facebook needs to invent the groan button. Because when I read her Facebook page and I come on one of those puns, I want to go, oh. So anyway, we'll make sure we include a couple of those. But let's begin tonight. Cheryl, I have so much I want to talk to you about because I am just so passionate about your book. But let's start with this. You have a great love, as Claire just indicated, for the natural world. You are a naturalist. You're a photo essayist. You're a nature photographer. You write nonfiction, and now you've written your first fiction book. But what is so clear to anybody who reads Sugar Birds is that you love the natural world. And if the natural world could be a character in a novel, it has a starring role along with your amazingly original protagonist. So, so if you can just talk about that for a minute, why was it so important for you that the natural world come to the forefront of Sugar Birds, the setting?
I was raised in the Pacific Northwest, out on the Olympic Peninsula, and nature was always a great source of support and comfort for me, in some difficult circumstances. And my sister and I spent time pretty much as feral kids a lot of the time, just roaming the wilds out there. And one thing my grandfather said to me when the Exxon Valdez cracked up in Alaska and there was that tremendous oil spill and all of that damage to the natural world, was that he said, there was an awful lot of carnage to nature in in World War II too. He says, but it was my experience that the land heals, nature heals. And when I look at the natural world, I really believe that through his creation, God speaks. And one thing that our God is a God of healing. And you can't look at nature without seeing healing intrinsic in it. And yeah, there's all the brokenness, and there's all the survival of the fittest in the natural world, but underneath it all is this expression of the love of the Creator, and you really can learn a lot about connecting with God through the natural world. So once I started watching for healing and watching for love intrinsic in the design in the natural world, that was just powerful for me. So and it's nourishing to me. I'm out there every day.
It is. Yeah, I am as well. We live here in the Great Smokies. And I think this is a perfect time for Sugarbirds to come out, not only because we're hungry for really excellent fiction, but also because I think so many of us have realized this past year during the isolation and the lockdowns and everything, that those of us who are blessed to live in beautiful natural settings, that's where we found healing. It's been a balm to our souls to be able to get outdoors, away from technology, away from other people, because we had to be socially distanced. So that's why when I started reading, I started marking up my copy of Sugarbirds, which I have right here, because I love the description so much, and maybe we'll get a chance to read some of those. And I'd encourage those of you who will be receiving the book. I know mine, I read an advance copy, but my new copy is on order and should arrive in a day or two. And I've totally marked up my first copy because there were just certain passages I just had to go back to. So Cheryl, one of the things that's so compelling about your book is I've been reading the advance reviews, of which there are legion. I'm not sure I've ever seen this many rave advance reviews for a debut novel. It's really extraordinary. And you would never say this, so I'm going to, that so many people have compared you to some remarkable writers. There have been a number of comparisons of your writing to Annie Dillard's. Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, of course, is a beautiful ode to the natural world, but then her book, The Living, a very familiar novel to many people there in the Pacific Northwest, particularly your home region. People have compared it to The Living. I have heard a number of people compare it to The Great Alone, to the Crawdads book. Now, why did it went right on my head? Where Crawdads Sing. Is that, I didn't get that quite right. And I read that book. Something about crawdads and singing.
Where the crawdads.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the word I was missing. Where the crawdads sing. Others have said it reminds them of Leaf Enger's Peace Like a River and of The Yearling. Some have said My Side of the Mountain or The Snow Child. But having said that, it's remarkable accolades, I think, when people are struggling to say, how can I tell you how good this book is? I have to find some basis for comparison. But having said that, it stands alone. It is its own book. One of the things I think most of us on this call really appreciate about quality fiction is when they are not predictable, but they're also not implausible. When you don't see where it's going and it keeps you turning the pages, but at the same time, you don't get to the end and say, oh gosh, that the writer pulled a fast one on me. That could never have happened. So can you comment on that? The fact that the book is so totally original. And tell us, for those, of course, most who are joining us don't know yet that there are actually two protagonists, two young women. Just tell us briefly about them and why you chose to write in their voices.
Well, the first one who opens the story is Aggie, and she's 10 years old. And the second one is Celia, who's 16. And, those are two very distinct times of life for young women. One, right at the edge of leaving childhood, and the other one, smack in the middle of adolescence. But both of these girls have been failed by adults in their lives, and their hearts are pretty hungry, and they find themselves in these emotional and spiritual wildernesses that are exemplified by the wilderness that's out there and that they find themselves in. So when Aggie lights this fire as a consequence of struggles with her mom, it's an accident, but it throws her into a place of loss and grief that is different from what most of us would have experienced, but everybody knows suffering. And what do you do with suffering, and where is God in suffering? Now, the book is not a Christian novel. It's very different than books that are in the Christian genre, but the spiritual dimension of life is part of life, and to ignore that in a story where kids are going through such tremendous trauma and have to deal with that, it's a story of hope too. And so why did I do that? Well, I conceived of the notion. I was inspired to write it by my granddaughter Gwyneth, who was
Yes.
she was just a baby at the time that I started. It took me 5 years to write, but I wanted to give her something that would show her the world that I grew up in, the world that I love, and the world that I learn about the Father from, that speaks to me,
Right.
speaks to my soul. And I also wanted to show her that no matter what life brings to her, or to any of my grandkids, because it will bring stuff, in this world we're going to have trouble, that there's hope, and that she can be resilient, and that she's never alone, and that when she's in connection with people who, with caring adults who love her, that she's going to be able to garner reserves, and that she will find those reserves for whatever it is life throws at her. And I'm just real excited for that. So that was my inspiration for that.
I love the fact that you were inspired to write this beautiful book for your first grandchild. And I think I've heard you say that you have other grandchildren as well. So you're hoping you have more stories in you.
I do.
And
I think I've got 4 in my head. So
every
I've got 4
grandchild is
grandkids.
going to
Yeah.
have one. And I think your Gwyneth, when she gets old enough to read Sugar Birds, she's going to love the fact that the character of Aggie. In fact, tell us, I know, but tell those who haven't read the book yet, Aggie is short for what? I think I love this.
Oh, Agate Esther. And
Agate.
yeah,
I love that she's
Italy.
named after this precious stone, agate.
Yeah, and there's quite a bit of that in the story, and without any spoilers, but yeah, it has to do with her mother too, relinquishing some of herself because as she became a mother, she denied some parts of herself that were really essential to her personhood. That through the course of the story, you'll see what happens with the mom too. And,
Oh, yeah.
And so there are so many themes layered in this book, and if we have time, we can talk about some of that. But this isn't just a story about young girls, and it isn't just although it is I've been told that it's a page turner and it's an adventure that is high adventure. It deals with a lot more stuff than that, and
It sure does.
Yeah,
because it's not genre fiction. Let's talk about that for a moment, Cheryl, because we're all familiar with romance and thrillers and suspense and YA and all the different genres, but this is not genre fiction. In fact, it's been called true upmarket fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting. I was on a call with some other writers last night, and I happened to mention that because I was so excited that today was and is launch day for Sugar Birds. And a couple of other writers had said, we haven't actually heard that term before, upmarket fiction. Can you just explain we talked about the fact that your publishing company put it on NetGalley, and it was a little hard maybe to find its place because it doesn't just neatly fit in one category. It is many things, and it is more than those things. But can you just explain to us how would you define upmarket fiction? What are the elements?
Yeah, it's not listed as a genre. When you look at any of there are codes called BISACs, and you look at any of those, there's nothing that says upmarket fiction, and they all try to compartmentalize these books into one genre or another. And this is really a cross genre piece, but literary fiction is driven by characters. This is a real condensed summary, but it's driven by the characters. And lots of times when you'll be reading literary fiction, it's beautifully written, but there may not be a compelling plot accompanying it, or it may move slowly just because you're just, it's like eating beautiful dessert. You're eating this dessert of all this language. Where genre fiction, general market fiction, would have this compelling plot, and the characters can fit into it. And the people who can, are able to do that really well, you don't notice that the characters, they'll complete their characters too. But I love the term upmarket fiction because it's literary, which means it's character driven, that, you've spent some time working with the human relationship, human hungers and loves, and at a deeper level, spiritual, emotional level. And yet yet it's still a page turner. So you still have a compelling plot. And so when you combine those two, you end up with what, you will see described as upmarket fiction. And agents are looking for that. And yeah, that's enough about that.
But Cheryl, I have to so agree, because I was greedy when I read it. I started and at page 1, I was hooked. I kept thinking, this book is really something unusual. This is extraordinary writing. And yet I wanted to race ahead because I was so eager to find out what happened. The characters are just so unusual, Aggie and Celia and Burnaby. And we can maybe talk more about that in a moment. The fact that you have a fully fleshed character who is on the autism spectrum. We have Cabot, kind of I'm not going to give any spoilers either, but there, and Mender, the wonderful names and characters. As I was reading, I thought, I feel like I know these people better than some of my next door neighbors because they were so skillfully written, and yet the plot moves ahead that it's hard to linger over them. So what I would encourage those of us who are part of our conversation right now is you may want to race through it because you can't wait to find out what happens, but then go back and do a leisurely read, which I've done, and just absorb the beauty of the language and the descriptions, the things you can learn about the world. Cheryl, let's move on to another question. We talked about the fact that your inspiration for writing the book was really to describe your world, a fictional world, but set in your world of the Pacific Northwest for Gwyneth, your first grandchild. But where did you get the idea to start with a young girl, a 10-year-old girl, which means it's not a coming of age novel because she's 10, and it's important to the plot that she's 10. There's certain places she's at as a 10-year-old that would be different than a 13 or 14-year-old. But where did you get the idea to start with a young girl and a fire?
It was really just a writing. It was a prompt in a writers group that I was in, and I just wrote a few hundred words, and then I submitted it, and then people in the group started asking to know what happened to this girl, and I had kind of thought I was done with the assignment. But then some of them even emailed me privately and encouraged me to continue with the story. So that sparked me on that. But then she started keeping me awake at night. And she started following me on my walks, and ideas for her kept coming. And so I started writing her. And she took a shape of her own. And then I also started identifying that some of this was emerging from my history climbing high in trees with my siblings, and my own experience in the natural world. And then I have this darling 10-year-old girl across the street. Well, she's older now, of course, but she would come over, and she likes to write. So she would sit with me while we would write, and I would pick her brain about being 10. And I love that.
That's wonderful.
That's Aubrey. Yeah.
10 is such a wonderful age. And I've heard, as young as she was, 10, I've heard some people compare, she's so original that I've heard some people say, well, she's a little like Scout. No, maybe not like Scout and Mockingbird, maybe more like Katniss in the Hunger Games. And yet she's not either of those things. Aggie is Aggie. There's nobody else like her. And I just can't wait for those who haven't read the book yet to get to meet her on their own. Well, I want to ask you a question about the fact that you've never written fiction before, and how did you make the switch? But before we do that, let's press pause and do our first giveaway. And I think you're going to draw 2 different names. And while you do those, one of the things that we promised that we would include, because many of those with us know you and they follow you on social media, and they know that Cheryl is many things, but she's also a very punny person whose Facebook posts make me reach for the groan button all the time. So while you're drawing the names, let me just start with one that I heard from you, Cheryl. You said, well, our neighbors gave their graduating daughter a locket with her picture in it. Now she's independent.
That's so bad.
It's so bad. I could just see people going, oh, that's terrible. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have the names of our prize winners? I think you're giving away 2 copies of your book, correct?
Yes. This first drawing is for 2 copies of Sugar Birds. And so the first one, and you guys see, I took my garden hat, and I have many, many names in here. And the 2 that I just drew are Karen Coy and Ron Davidson. So I'll be sending you guys books.
Yay, Karen Coy and Ron Davidson, congratulations. And if you've already ordered your book, now you've got a great gift for somebody else. So, well, Cheryl, I know one of the first things I wondered, because I knew you as a nonfiction writer through your columns, through Goose Ridge, through your other writing, but to switch genres, that's very daunting for many of us who are nonfiction writers. We'd like to write the new Gone with the Wind or Poisonwood Bible or something, but we just can't imagine switching that process in our brains. So how did you make the switch from the nonfiction writing, which you've been published for years now? I think Goose Ridge was 20th anniversary, didn't it have last year of its publication. So how did you make that switch? Tell us about the process.
Well, part of it is that I'm in my 60s, and so I hit that, and I have this thing that I had been terrified to do my whole life because, I don't know, fear of failure, or just that it's a whole different animal writing fiction. And I had never given concentrated effort to studying how to write fiction. But in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, he talks about the 10,000 hours that you need to, and I said, I have 10,000 hours, I can learn this. So I set out to do that because when I started writing, I really didn't even know what I didn't know. I've got a master's in English, and I taught English for many years, and I've written a lot, but it had all been in the nonfiction forum. But I also think that as I've gotten older, I care much less about teaching and more just about sharing what brings me joy, or what my sharing an experience, telling stories. And so I thought, well, I better learn how to do it right, So I moved from the teaching mode into a coming alongside and a sharing. And so when you tell a story like that with the illustrations that there are in there, and they aren't intended to be didactic illustrations, but they are intended to show the entirety of life, of the life experience, at a spiritual and an emotional and a physical level, and the things that people go through at various life stages. And you've got every age in this book, and it's really a book for all ages. But I still didn't know what I was doing. So we had a small group that was meeting, and I just really asked for prayer that I could find the right developmental editor to help show me how to scene construction, narrative arcs, the sorts of things that drive a story forward. I just needed some foundational stuff, and you can read all the books you want, but I still needed interactive feedback. So the next morning I went in and put in the search once again, and was trying to find an editor that would take the story to the next step. And I had worked with some other editors, and they said, "Oh, this is great, it's fine," but it wasn't ready. And so I first started working with Sandra Bird, and she helped me reach the point of having that first draft manuscript. And that was just huge for me because it actually had a whole arc. It had a lot of the pieces that I hadn't known how to do before. And so I thought it was reasonably ready, and I sent it out to some beta readers and got their feedback on it. And then I pitched it to some agents who said, "We don't know what we will do with this book. It's not young adult," which I thought it was. And they said, "Aggie can't be 10, she's got to be 13. Well, Aggie's not 13, she's 10. And then here's 10. Yeah, and then here's Celia, who's 16. And finally, I ended up talking with this one agent who's also an author, who was very helpful to me. And she said, and I'd heard this a couple of other times, but she was the most convincing. She said, "You really need to be writing this for the adult market." And that was just liberating to me. And so then I thought, okay, back to the drawing board. I need to learn more. And so I started again looking for somebody who could really take it to a new place. And editors don't write for you. They don't, there are different types of editors, but the type of editor that I was looking for didn't write for me, but I wanted somebody who would help me would just help me do what I wanted to do in the book. Anyway, so I found an editor who people just raved about, and she had 30 years experience in industry. She was in the Bronx. She is just a stellar editor. She was responsible for editing books like The Help and Lilac Girls. And I thought, the chances of her working with me are slim to none, but I'm going to try. So, so I wrote to her and explained, that the book had won a couple of awards, but as a young adult novel, but I wanted to move it into the, to the adult general fiction, general market fiction. And so she took quite a while to get back to me. She's pretty booked. And she wrote back, and when I finally heard back from her about 6 weeks later, she says, "This story is mesmerizing to me. I'm really quite intrigued by it." And she said, "I do have an opening in a couple of months, and I would love to, I'd love to work with you." She says, "But I'm not sure you want to work with me." And I said, "Why would I not want to work with you?" And she said, "Because your learning curve is going to be steep and your rewriting is going to be arduous." So, but I had no idea how steep and how arduous. There would be times I'd get her comments back on stuff that I would send her. And I remember my husband and I were driving across Eastern Washington, and I was hyperventilating. I just don't even know what she's talking about. And, and I'd taught literature for years. It was just a new way of looking at it. But she taught me so many things so beautifully, and really insisted that I not compromise in certain areas. And that was Alexandra Shelley, and she was amazing, just amazing. And then so then it went into multiple revisions, and I rewrote this book many times because I would learn a concept, I would be rewriting it, and then I would go, okay, that's it, that's what she's talking about, and then there it would be. And then I would see other things, and so I'd go back and go through the whole thing again, and I rewrote it many times, and yet there was no other option. So then the publisher is right at the very end there, wants it to go in for a copyright or a copy edit. So I sent it to Ellen Nottbaum, who has written. She's a marvelous novelist herself, and a terrific editor. But she also has an autistic son, and she has written some very insightful books on children who are, on children and young adults who are experiencing, symptoms of the spectrum, and who are dealing with that, and for parents with that. So she was just the perfect person to give it a final go over, to take a look at my character Burnaby, who's an autistic savant. And like she says, every person who has traits, spectrum traits, is unique. There's no way you can categorize somebody on the spectrum. And Burnaby is very unique. He's a high functioning person. He's brilliant, but the things that he experiences because he is a person on the spectrum are really what make him beautiful. And so those three editors taught me a tremendous lot. And I was really reluctant even to send it into her, because I thought, I'm done. I have rewritten this thing so many times.
Can you even estimate, Cheryl, how many times? I know we have writers. I've recognized some of the names. We have other novelists who have joined us. And I think this is probably encouraging to them, and at the same time daunting, thinking, whoa, how many? I thought it was one and done. And
no, and I thought that too. When I finished the first manuscript, I thought, well, I'll just clean this up a little bit, it'll be fine. But no, I mean, 30, 50, I don't know. I wish I would have counted. I wish I would have known how many times I was going to go through it, but it was worth it. But you knew. You knew when you finished. When I finished, yes. And first you're starting conceptually, you're working with even concepts, you're adding chapters, and then you're working with scenes, and then you're working with paragraphs, then you're working with lines, and then you're combing through it word by word by word. Well, and
let's talk about some of the themes, Cheryl. I know for me, there are themes of shame and the complicated relationship we have with our fathers and our mothers, which is why I think young people can certainly read this, but those of us who are older and have more life experience, we read that and think it causes us to think deeply about what happens when a parent is absent, or a parent is perhaps mentally or physically troubled themselves. How does that affect the children? And so you write on so many different levels. Adversity, is anything too awful to be forgiven? That's a major question that the book asks. what made you decide to address some of these, I guess I call them universal hungers that we all have? And the theme the book would be plot without them, but there are so many things to ponder in this book. How did you decide on these themes?
I don't think you decided. I didn't decide it ahead of time. And one of the spectacular things about writing fiction that I had heard happened, but I didn't anticipate that it would happen with me like it did, but it did, is that you start. Let me back up. I'll back up. Okay, there are different ways that people write fiction from everything that I've read and from friends that I've talked to. Some of them are plotters, pure and, that's just the way they do it. They've got sticky notes all over their walls. They have every scene. They know what's going to happen. And then when they get that whole thing laid out, they start writing it. What Sandra Bird helped me to do, because I don't think like that. I'm not a linear thinker. Things kind of come into focus I'm kind of driving through fog. I can see up ahead a certain distance, but Sandra Bird helped me to lay out the rails so that I knew my trajectory, I knew my destination, I knew my conceptual arc for the story. But when I sat at my computer or with my pad and started writing, those characters talk. They tell you what. I would try to do something with one character or another, and they wouldn't let me do that. They would not let me do that.
They had minds of their own.
They did. They did. And I don't even know what you asked me, Maggie.
Oh, well, in fact, just what you said, I was pulling out. Okay, this is Celia talking. Let me just read one thing. Gosh, y'all, I wish I could just read you this whole book, but I love this description. This is Celia when there's kind of a guy she's getting sweet on, and you'll find out more about that when you read it. But she said, she's listening to him talk. And then she says, who cared if he'd said he sold parakeets at the farmer's market? I still would have hung on his cadence. He talked with an energy that leapt into the next moment, the next sentence, and I drank in every carbonated word. I read that and I thought, yes, what a perfect description of a 16-year-old who's just enamored with somebody who may or may not be the right person for her. So I don't remember what the question was either, but we were just talking about how the themes that I've heard other novelists say that the characters, they're living in your head and they go the way they want to go, not necessarily the way you are going to have them go. And one more question, Cheryl, and then our time is going so fast and we have questions. I want to make sure we can get to the questions that our friends have been asking us in the chat. So let me ask you this first, and then we're going to go to the questions that have been submitted. Oh, and before we go to the questions, we'll do one more giveaway. But you mentioned that you started this book in your 60s. Of course, you've been writing decades before that, but you started your first novel in your 60s, which you and I have laughed that we have that in common. I didn't write a novel, but I published my first nonfiction book when I was 67. So it's a little bit late in the game, and we're just, I think, both so grateful that publishers would feel that those of us who have more life experience have something to say that we couldn't have said in our 20s or 30s. So what would you say to maybe others who are listening in right now, who may feel, is it too late in the game for me? What advice would you have for them?
Oh, it's a sweet time of life to be writing, because we have, we've been all the ages that we'll be writing about, probably most of them. And I also think at this age that some of the complications of life, as viewed in hindsight, become simpler. Not that you write more simply, but that there's just a crystallization about what's important and what's not, or what's a life course where one thing's going to lead, where something else is going to lead. You have I don't know. It's just a sweet time to write, and yet don't just sit there in your. I mean, you can just sit there in your jammies and and scratch stuff down on a page, but learn how to do it. Because there's so much to learn, and it's so exciting, and it's so much fun, and you will open up a whole new world. And we've got this sweet time too, because our kids are grown, they've got their own families, maybe you're retired, and it's just this open window, and yet the clock is ticking. Will I have my mind in 15 years?
Yeah, we're very
I
aware.
don't know. I don't know.
That most of our history is behind us. There's
Yeah.
fewer years remaining than the ones past. But out of the richness of those years, those decades,
Yeah.
we have a wealth of things to write about. None of it's wasted. Even the horrible things that have happened to us, it becomes compost, or to use the image from the natural world, manure.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
that we can mine that to share to others. And so I think that's very encouraging for others who are on this chat who might think, oh, I've always wanted to write a novel, but is it too late? No, it's not. It's not. Somebody, in fact, I was just talking with, we have a brand new independent bookstore opening up in our town, and I was downtown, and would you believe your book came up? She saw the posts about it, and she already said she's ordering it.
Oh, she did. Good.
Yes.
Good.
And we were talking about the fact that you and I are both in our 60s. For me, it's late 60s. And she was mentioning that Delia Owens, the writer of Where the Crawdads Sing, I think published hers in her late 60s.
Yeah, she was our age. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the best is yet to be, y'all. It really is. So we want to get to our questions, but before we do, I think you're going to draw two more names. And while you're drawing, let me read one more pun, courtesy of the famous novelist, Cheryl Gray Bostrom, who I've heard her say that she says, when I'm out taking wildlife pics, I always request permission to access private property. Yesterday, I asked a farmer if I could cross his field to get to the woods beyond. Why, sure, he said. I let anybody cross my fields for free, but you should know that the bull out there charges.
Yeah, right.
So bad. You are a great novelist, but you're really a bad humor writer.
Terrible. And see, you guys, I didn't even tell the puns. I asked Maggie to, because I can't tell them. they just fall flat. So
well, I love them so much. I asked Cheryl to send me, I was going to copy and paste off her Facebook page, and she kindly sent me a Word doc so I could share them at our variety show at our family reunion. So, okay. Do you have a couple of names for us?
I do. I've got two, and one is Ellen Snee, and the other one is Judy Larkin. So congratulations, Judy and Ellen. And I've got two books here. One is Sugar Birds, and one I ordered a copy of Maggie's book, This Life We Share, and this is a gem. So I will send these out to you.
Thank you. I thank you, and my publisher thanks you for buying that one copy. It may have been the only copy sold today. Who knows? Well, we're going to go to. We have about 15 minutes, and there are some great questions. The first is not a question; it's a comment, and I think this will just put you at ease, Cheryl. Angie said, Cheryl, you sound great and you look great too. So there you go. That encouraging. Yeah. And then Michael commented, yes, Sugar Birds is very much like Where the Crawdads Sing, and Sugar Birds does sing. That's a beautiful way to think about it, given
I love that.
There is so much metaphor woven throughout about birds in it.
I love that.
So,
thanks, Mike.
And then Mike's asking, he said, Cheryl, can you describe your writer's journey? Well, we have talked about that some, and your Sugar Birds journey, but okay, we haven't talked about this. He said, what were the best and the hardest parts? Let's start with the best. What was the best part of writing Sugar Birds? I think we kind of know what the hardest was. It was like 50 trillion revisions, but
yeah. Well, and the best part was when the characters started talking, when I felt like I was recording, and so I was the mouse in the pocket. I was their observer and recording what those characters were doing. And it was great fun. Yeah, it was wonderful.
And they do speak in their own voices. They're very distinct. Yeah. I've read novels, we all have, where it may be a great plot, but pretty much everybody's voice sounds the same. But it's we know when it's Cabot. We know when it's Burnaby or Mender. In fact, I love that name. Not a spoiler alert, but the older female figure in the book, Mender. Celia, Aggie, of course, is totally original. So I love the fact that this whole population began living in your head, and you were basically listening and kind of taking dictation when they told you how they were feeling and what they wanted to say. And they are so fully realized on the page.
Well, and speaking of voices, I was going to try to record this myself.
Oh yeah, we didn't. Yeah, tell us about the audiobook.
Yeah, I was going to try to record this myself, and so I by sweet grace, I found this fantastic studio that's a half hour from us, and this guy's done audiobooks for 30 years, for big houses, And so I gave it a shot. For 2 days, I recorded. But I said at the end of it, I go, Bob, I'm just sounding like an amateur here. I just sound like an author who's trying to read these characters. I could read the narration, but there are some voices there that are really distinctive, and they're all ages, and I couldn't do it. And he says, I have a reader. And I said, and so I'm thinking, well, we're really out in the boonies out here. And I thought, well, who could you have? And he says, just listen. And so he puts on a recording by this woman who she had just finished a book in there. And I go, oh my goodness, I know that voice. And it was Jane Entwistle, and she's won Odyssey Awards and Earphone Awards. She's got 4 pages of marvelous audiobooks and her own following of listeners, 4 pages of audiobooks on Audible. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a try, because again, these people have to accept this, right? But she went to Western, which is the university in a town about half hour south of us. And she came up here to escape COVID. And so she was working remotely out of his studio. And so I corresponded with her and sent her the book, and she read it and she loved it. And she said, but she wrote back to me and she says, I don't know if I can record this book. And I said, well, okay, well, I'm not surprised, but thank you for considering it. She goes, no, because I cried through the last few chapters. And anyway, she did record it, and she's from Great Britain, and you cannot even tell with her voice. I mean, she says figured, and there are a couple of spots, that you can maybe tell a little bit, but her accomplishment of these voices and of just her phrasing, it's just beautiful. She did a marvelous job. So I couldn't be more thrilled. And so the audiobook is live now too. And
I'm so glad, because we've talked. I have a very long car trip coming up for a family situation, and now I know, even though I've read the book, I want my husband to hear it. We've got like 15 hours one way in the car.
There you go.
I'm going to get it on Audible, because I want to hear because I can picture Aggie and Burnaby and Celia and Mender and I can picture them, but I want to hear them. Yeah. So even though
she did a great job.
Yes, I'm going to get that. I'm glad you mentioned it. A couple of other questions. Let's see. Lily said, this is your first fiction novel, and you mentioned you have ideas for 4 more stories, at least for the other grandchildren. Mm-hmm. Are these other possible stories also fiction? I believe they are. Mm-hmm. And do you anticipate, this is a great question, do you anticipate that nature will always be a significant part of the storyline? That's a very perceptive question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Always. Because I don't want to write it. That's what I love. And so I'm going to write about it. And include it, for characters to be wrapped in this magnificent creation it becomes, like you said earlier, Maggie, it becomes a character itself.
It is. It's a starring role to me.
Yeah. And the next novel, excuse me, sorry.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. We want to hear if you don't want to give it away, but if you have any little hints of what you're thinking for novel number 2.
Well, Celia and Burnaby are in it, and it's set in Washington's Palouse. And I'm really already having fun with it. This baby's potty trained now. She's going off in the world. And so now I'll be able to give more concerted effort to the next story. But
I'm so glad those characters are coming back.
Yeah.
Because we see so much of them, but we know there's so much yet to come, and we don't want to lose them. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, this is a great question from Rachel. What's your best advice for a memoir writer who wants to write fiction?
There are a lot of similarities. I'm not an expert in memoir, so I can't really speak to the particulars of it. But you're still going to want to be focusing on a particular quest or a particular hunger or a particular need or desire of the key character, because when you're trying to write a life, there's so many directions you can take, so many different voices, and you just really want to zero that in and figure out what you want to say, what you're trying to accomplish. And and my characters are all composites of people I've known, or people that that there are composites of people going into these characters. And memoirists need to be a little more careful. But you're saying memoir going to novel writing.
Yes.
I think there's a lot more freedom.
Starting with memoir. Oh, there is,
Yeah.
because you can tell truth in a fictional way without your family and friends calling you up and saying, what are you doing talking about me?
Yeah.
Even if you try to disguise, but we all write out of the lives that we have. So
Yeah, but you can
memoir
really tell truth. You can tell truth in fiction, and
you
it's
can sometimes even bigger truths
yeah.
than you could tell in any other way. And okay, Cindy is asking, so with repeated editing and rewriting, is it a whole different book than when you started?
It's
I
very
don't even know
different.
if you can estimate. Would you say it's a
Yeah,
completely
it's
different
very different. Yeah, it's very different.
book?
And
Okay.
you know, there are some common scenes in there, but every single word in that book's been gone over. Every single
Yes.
word, many times.
And Suzanne is asking, did you always know the title Sugar Birds, or was it ever something else? Did you have a working title before Sugar Birds? We don't want to give away why it's called Sugar Birds, although it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But was that always the title from the beginning?
Oh no. It started out, I actually, because it was going to be YA, right? So I had some crazy titles, but I actually asked an English teacher at the school where I used to teach just to run some titles by his kids and see which ones they liked. And so they liked this one called Climb, Run, Drown. But you know, that lasted for a while. And then there were many others. And I tried out dozens and dozens of titles and would live with them and roll them around in my mouth and think, you know, just ask myself if they represented what I wanted the book to do. But the problem too is that when you live in a world where or in a country where 1 million books a year are published, and I don't know what percentage of those are fiction, you've got a lot of people using titles. And I didn't want to use a title that you know, that was in the same genre or a recent title. There's another book out there called Sugar Birds. It's one word, and it was a long time ago. And yeah, but
Well, I
this
love
was-
it. It's so memorable. It's easy to remember, and it's an adjective we never think to put with birds. A sugar bird. What is a sugar bird? It had me intrigued. And then I'm not going to read that part because that would be a
Okay.
spoiler to get to where it is. But
okay.
okay, Cindy is asking, you said, especially for those of us starting a little bit later in life, just learn how to do it. And she said, where does one start to learn how to do it? Would you have some advice for aspiring or emerging writers? What would have been the most helpful for ways for you to learn the craft? You mentioned the developmental editor and then some of the
Yeah.
writing groups you've been in. And you
Yeah,
had
that was the developmental editor was down the road. First,
Yeah.
you just, you know, I read tons of books. I got on all the websites, you know, read and read until I started seeing things emerge that, you know, that were repeated, that became familiar to me. And then I took a few classes. I like poetry too, and I write a fair bit of poetry. And so I took some different classes through Gotham Writers Studio, and I think it's called something different now, but in New York City. And it was an online class, but but it's got a facilitator who's an experienced author, and then, you know, a small group. So you would submit these different assignments, and you just start to get your feet wet. But that's not enough, because lots of times the critiques you'll get from fellow writers are inaccurate. They don't know what to zero in on. You know, you really need to read and read and read and write and write
Yes.
and write. Then, you know, in this marvelous event, I met a woman named Sue-Ann Lindy on a plane who told me about a writing group, and she connected me with 2 other writers, and we had a critique group. We were all working on our books. We critiqued each other's work for a good year, maybe a year and a half. And that was also very helpful, but that was further down the line. And I just say, you just have to immerse yourself in it and get feedback from people who, you know, join the groups first and write to me, and then we can talk. I mean, I'll happily share ideas with you, but you know, it's just been so many years now of just continuing to nuance it. And then depending on what level you want to take it to, you've got to keep finding people who are expert in those areas who can take you to the next level.
That's right. That's wonderful advice. Well, our time has gone so fast. We have time for just one more question. So let me give you that. But before we do, I do want to mention, pass on a note of thanks to you. Cheryl, from Audrey, who said, thank you for your thoughts about writing after 60. Today is my 66th birthday.
Oh,
So
you're right there with us, Audrey.
yes, you're
Yeah.
young, Audrey.
Yeah.
You're younger
Yeah.
than me. So good
Yeah.
for you. There's still time.
Yeah.
I hadn't published my first book by 66. So good for
Right.
you. And here's our last question. And then Claire is going to come back to close us off.
Okay.
This is a really perceptive question from somebody who's already read Sugarbirds. She said most, not all, of the men in Sugarbirds are very flawed or disappointing. She said, please talk about any redemptive word you might have for male readers. So what ways would you say, yeah, how would you comment on that?
Well, I hope that all the characters are flawed because they are, but the presence of fathers in this book and of the father they're very significant characters. And you know, when you look at Celia's dad, he adores his daughter, but he's stuck. He doesn't know, you know, his wife has left him. He's worried about the friendships that his daughter's developing, and he makes a bad choice, but he's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, he has to take off for this job, and she's livid, and it drives her into all kinds of stuff that she wouldn't have done ordinarily, you know. But just the presence or absence of fathers in our lives, you know, whether that's our Heavenly Father or whether those are our actual physical fathers. You know, I was raised without a father, and so this has always been a big thing for me to be looking at and watching these other dads. I think he's, you know, just to see that these dads can make mistakes. They can, because we all make mistakes, but there's redemption in that, and there can be healing. And the same thing with Aggie's dad. You know, there are some things that he could have done that he didn't do, but then he's seriously injured and he's out of the picture. And you know, that stuff happens too.
It sure does. And like you said, the characters are all flawed because they are, as we all are by human nature. They have wonderful qualities, and they have ways that they disappoint themselves and they disappoint others, because Celia and Aggie are both deeply wounded by their mothers too, for different reasons. And we don't have time to go into that. I think our time is up. And to get the answer to those questions, you're going to have to all read the book. And welcome back, Claire.
Wow, this has been so much fun to listen to. And while we still have a couple minutes left, we have to acknowledge in the chat, there's someone who I think you might know, Laura Bostrom.
Oh, yeah.
She says,
Hi,
she says, Graham and Paige love their Amma, and we're so proud of you. And then real quickly, she did ask, we want to know if you see yourself in any of your characters.
Oh, probably all of them. I had one friend say that she thought she thought Burnaby reminded her most of me. Now that was the first time I'd heard that, but I'm a composite of Aggie and Celia for sure. I mean, there are pieces of me in those two, but then I go, yeah, Burnaby, well, in some ways, sure.
He's smart.
And I'm a grandma. And so, you know, I'm a grandma who is not going to do everything right either. So, yeah.
There's no grandma who does everything right, you know.
No.
But we're human. We're all human, right? So thank you. This was the best conversation. The two of you have clearly a really great rapport. I hope you get to meet each other in person one day. That would be nice to be in the same room.
We're hoping to this fall. Yeah, because I feel like I know Cheryl so well, but we literally haven't met, which is kind of amazing. We really got to know each other through COVID and through, you know, she was very supportive of when my book came out as well, but it's nothing like hers. I mean, Sugarbird is just, to me, it's a tour de force. It really is.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you know, when you compared it to Peace Like a River by Leif Enger, and then you started talking about this young character, this young female character, and you were comparing her to Katniss or Scout. But then I thought maybe Swede Land in Peace Like a River, she's also a very great young character. So I can't wait to read Sugarbirds. I have not read it yet, but boy, am I excited to read it. And I did pop in the chat the link to the Village Books website where folks can purchase autographed copies. The next link that I'm putting in the chat, this is to Libro FM. This is an audiobook website where you can purchase audiobooks much like you would on Audible. But if you're looking for an alternative audio book source that works with independent bookstores, that would be Libro FM. Libro is great.
Thanks for that.
So the top link is villagebooks.com. That's where you can get a signed print copy of the book, and then the link below that is Libro FM, where you could get an audiobook. And I'm so excited to hear that there's already an audiobook. And Jane Entwistle, that's amazing.
That's great, huh?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, gosh, well, do you ladies have final thoughts? I want to say thank you so much to the audience who joined us, but I think you probably also want to say that too. And what are your closing remarks?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I know there are a number of you there who had an opportunity to do advanced reviews, and it's just been a marvelous community of support, and I'm so grateful because I didn't know if I could do this or not, and so many of you encouraged me along the way, and you've just blessed me. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. You ladies, thank you to the audience who showed up today. Thank you to all of you who came to the signing today at our bookstore in Linden. And we're so appreciative to you all. So I think this is where we say goodbye and thank you.
Say
All
good
right.
night,
Bye, guys.
and happy reading.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye
Bye.
now.
Bye-bye.